Happy Sabbath, happy day. So I invite you for a silent word of prayer. Amen. So welcome for today's class. So uh, they ought to have been sorry. So it ought to have been Lena's class, but she suggested I should take a double. So I will start with a mind blower. So just want to ask a question. This is before I start my class. I just want us to challenge our minds. So before I even write something, let me just make some introductory thoughts to what I'm about to ask. So I hope we all understand that currently where we stand as a movement, there are a lot of issues that are surrounding this movement internally. So since last year, 2024, we have had Elder Terry come and give a presentation. I hope most of us have watched a series of those presentations that Elder Terry has been giving. And it's not only Elder Terry who is giving presentations. There are other teachers who also claim to have a message that would add something to this movement. Let me just say that. And I think for those who have been keen enough, sometimes back, can't remember when, around this month, Elder Emma came up with is it a timetable of all these teachers? They have been given a chance to actually present in local ministries, and each person will be given a chance, I'm saying the members, to listen and put to scrutiny every messenger with his or her message. Are we together? So, and of all that, what is actually challenging us is to understand this question that I'm about to post now. And the question is, what is the Sunday law? And I think I can just summarize this into two options. So what is the Sunday law? And the first thing we need to understand, is it a point? Or the second one, is it a what? A period. So that's what is the issue that is confronting us right now. So we understand when you look at the many perspectives that have been given, I'm just going to list a few. There might be more. Maybe you can help me. So the first person, or there is a teacher who is suggesting that the Sunday law waymark is July what? 18, 2024. There is also another thought that maybe the Sunday law is not July, but when? November what? 5th, 2024. Another one has a perspective, maybe it might be when? January the what? When Trump is going to step into office. When is that? Is it 20th? So January 20th, 2024. There is another perspective also. Maybe we don't go with a specific date, but we go for the entire year, the year 2024. And there is also maybe other thoughts. People will still feel it's not none of this, but it's something in the what? In the future. No specific date, but it's almost coming. So these are the many thoughts that we have. At least we have not had a consensus where we can actually all agree that maybe it's this date, this date, this date on. Sorry, yeah, 2025. Thank you. It's January 2025. Yeah. So these are the many thoughts that we have. So, and when I draw a structure here, this one, so we know this is the Sunday law, this is the close of probation, this is a portion of our reform line, this is the loud cry. And what I think most of us would agree is that we are coming to a realization that this waymark is a Sunday law and people are calling it the national Sunday law. And this one is also a Sunday law, but it's not what? The worldwide Sunday law. So this entire period is the period of the Sunday law. It's the period when we have the harvest of the Nethinims. So, and the issue that we have is a marker for this event. Are we together? And that's why people are giving multiple dates. And some have studies to back up their claim. Why they would think it's not July, but another date. Or why they would think it's November or January or the year 2024. Are we together? So I don't know what is your thoughts on this. But I just want us to have some thoughts to help us understand what is happening. And the first thing we are going to realize, which I can say actually now, we have a consensus on this, is that we have a new marker for the Sunday law. So that's one of the things. So one important point that we need to understand. So we have a new marker for the Sunday law. So let me ask, what has been the old marker for the Sunday law? And what is this new marker for the Sunday law? Anyone with an idea? Like, if I explain, you will not get the answer. It's okay. So, like when you look at the old thoughts that we had, there is a certain way we expected a Sunday law to fulfill. There are certain issues that we were anticipating and looking upon to be able to say, this is what identifies how a Sunday law looks like. And most of these thoughts will get it from, let me say, Ellen White, inspiration. So, from past histories, actually, we can go there and say, all these histories, the Waymark Sunday law has been marked by a certain issue. And what is that issue that has marked previous Sunday laws? Anyone with an idea? I hope you understood.
Initially, the thought was that you'll have blue laws, but over time, unfortunately, it's more, we not actually negating the thought actually of blue laws for people, but due to it, the issue of inequality. So, laws are interesting.
Okay, let me first pick your first thought. I agree with that. So, when you go to the Millerite history, so we can mark two histories here. The 1850 history and the 1888 history. And the marker for this history, the first alpha history, we are going to see we always marked the Fugitive Slave Act. Then this one, we had what we call the blue laws. So we are going to see inspiration puts this into our mindset that for us to identify the Waymark we would call a Sunday law, we are dealing with what? Laws, or what I would say bills. Are we together? So for so long we have anticipated this framework we would call a Sunday law. This framework we would call a Sunday law. This framework we would call a Sunday law. We are going to see that the thought that has been encircling our minds is we expect a law, kind of, or a bill to be passed. And actually, we are going to see that borrowing words from the great controversy, we saw the role the legislature and the judiciary were to play in the enactment of the Sunday law. And it is the same dynamics we saw here. There is Blair's bill in Congress. This bill is being debated in the houses, and if it passes, it's going to become a law. And so, with that in mind, we have always anticipated in our history that this event will be marked by a what? By a law. But I'm now saying we are coming to a realization the marker, which has been issues to do with laws, is changing. And what is the new marker that we have now? Anyone with an idea? Because first, as I was saying, we understand it to be equality, and I'm saying, even as we spoke of equality, maybe I'm wrong, but I would think most of us expected if Trump comes into power, maybe Trump will be able to pass a law touching on equality, maybe an oppressive law against the LGBTQ community, against women, against immigrants, such kind of thoughts. Are we together? So we still were in the same thought. It's a law, now not Sunday sacredness or slavery, but touching on equality. But all I'm saying, even with equality here, we are saying the marker is changing. It's not about law. And I think this is something that people now have a consensus. And what is that? Yes? Pardon? Yes, thank you. So we are coming to a realization the marker is not just laws now. Yeah? As Festus is saying, we are not negating the fact that we might have laws, oppressive laws in nature. But the marker now, where people are actually trying to agree, is that unlike the past two histories, we are going to see in our history, we have another line of thinking. This is the Omega history, the history of the 144K. And Joy is telling us is the issue of voting. So, how did we arrive here to voting? Shifting from laws to voting. You have an idea, Joy? So, and I'll just put this into brackets, making a decision. You have an idea? And the other one?
Another option that I've had is also about actually that Peter's fabulous Maximus Gadget is actually marked to 73, but to 72 there's also voting that is happening in Julius.
Okay, thank you. So, this takes us to last year, 2024, when Elder Terry began her presentation. And from Acts 27, she's going to lead us to the Waymark 273 and 272, this history here. So we have the year 275, 273, 272. So Maureen, what happens in 275 BC? No idea. I forget your name. Justus. What happened here? You don't remember? Your friend? Your name? Steve. Steve, you remember? Faith? Gitao. Do you remember what happens in 275 BC? Egypt sends ambassadors to Rome. No. If you have an idea, Esther, Joseph, or Max? Yes, thank you. It's the Battle of Beneventum. So this is the Battle of Beneventum, a war between Rome and who? Pyrrhus. And what has happened in this battle, Maureen? So it's a victory for Rome, and Pyrrhus loses the war. So I think we must be able to understand this war for us to see a cause and effect relationship here. So in 273, this is when Ptolemy, the king of Egypt, is going to send diplomats to Rome. And the reason why he's sending diplomats, it's because of what has actually happened here. Are we together? So Rome has won this war. Rome is rising to the scenes of the world, showing their dominance, and Ptolemy wants to acknowledge that. So Ptolemy seeks diplomacy with Rome. So, and as Elder Tess had put it, the following year, 272, Rome actually responds by sending what? Diplomats to Egypt. And this delegation is led by Quintus, Fabius. So, and this is where we get this name. Are we together? So, if you go to the Midnight Cry message, Elder Tess will at least speak about this part. Doesn't focus on this. But when Elder Terry begins to speak, she's going to focus more on this part. And using the Roman nomenclature, which I'm not going to do for now, we are going to realize that the name Quintus is connected with a number. What number is that? Yes? It's connected with the number 5. And the name Fabius, which means faba beans, which were used for voting, is connected with what? Voting. Are we together? And this is seen as one word, a maximum flood. So what we are going to realize is that if we have to make use of this name, we are going to realize we need to understand that the word Quintus, which is number 5, links us to this month. Which month is it? July. And we are going to see that at least this is where Elder Terry gets the idea of July, because the name itself, which this history, by then we always understand it to be the Sunday law. This was the Battle of Panium, which is 2021. So we are going to see that the marker for the Sunday law, according to Elder Terry, what she's coming up with July, is that the number 5 associated with the month of July has something to do with what? Voting. Are we together? And that's where we begin to get the ideas. So we have the number 5 and we have the issue of voting. They are the new markers for our mark. Because at least if you look at most of the dates, and we are going to see this thought, what is confusing us is coming to this consensus. If it's voting, and we are also saying that if we have to understand what is the flood, we need to understand the word flood in the context of the word. Are we together? So if it's a maximum flood, it is in the context of what? It's in the context of what? Voting. Are we together? So you need to understand what is the maximum voting that is the marker for this waymark here. Is it July when we have the maximum voting, or is it November? Some are actually saying it's not even that, it's progression, it's a period, it begins here and it swells, and so the climax must be January when Trump takes office. These are the thoughts that actually we have. So I just wanted to take us here to just give where we derive the idea that voting is the marker. So I'm going to do a short summary. A minute. Let me just do a summary because of those who have just arrived, and then I'll give you a chance to ask. So I began my class by a mind blower. It's not actually my study, the study I intend. So, and I gave what is actually happening inside the movement. Since last year, we have had a series of teachers who for now claim to have a message that would help us keep moving forward. And I said, if you have watched the platforms, Elder Emma has actually given us a timetable where all these teachers will be able to present their course. Are we together? And I hope we'll actually be there to listen, to put to scrutiny every message. And I'm going to give some thoughts why we have a dilemma in the movement as we speak. We actually have not yet agreed what event is this, what would mark as the actual point for the Sunday law. And I gave some different perspectives that we actually have. And I'm saying, of all these perspectives, there are some things that we have agreement on. A good one is that we have a new marker for the Sunday law. If you go to the other histories, more so our alpha histories, it has two histories, the 1850 and the 1888. And the marker for that event has been a law, laws and bills. So we had the idea that if at all we expect a Sunday law, this way mark, what should we anticipate in mind? Kind of a law. Are we together? But now we are having a difficulty because we are coming to a realization, even of the most dates marked, the marker is not a law, but an issue to do with what? Voting. And I'm saying that is the marker that has actually changed. So we are going to see in our history, the marker is, we are not saying that there will not be laws. There might be laws. Many, actually, when Trump came to office, one of the first thing he did was what? Executive orders. Are we together? We would call those laws. And we are going to see that in our history, the issue has changed. It's now not laws that are marking, but many are coming to the idea that it's actually voting, making of a decision. And I tried to explain where this idea of voting came from. It's studies that Elder Terry actually presented that helped us understand that this event here is marked by a character. And this character is Quintus Fabius Maximus Judges. And when you try to understand what this name actually means, you're going to realize it's connected with the number 5 when you use the Roman nomenclature, connected to July, and we are also going to see Fabius, it's connected to voting. So we are going to see that this idea of voting comes from this study that is presented. I think that's what we have done so far. Yes. Yes. Okay, I think what Elder Tess did, she didn't separate these two. So, okay, I don't want to, yes? Historically, they are not, it's one. It's just a name of a person, it's a 4 names. So I think, and what Elder Terry focused on is this one. And I will put words into her mouth and say what she thought, what I would also think. By then, this was not a familiar name to our movement. Actually, by then I didn't have an idea what it would do to us. Are we together? But this one had some bits of ideas because of the word flood. Because we know what flood is. There are verses in the Bible, Isaiah, Daniel chapter 9, that speaks, Revelation 12, that speaks of a what? Of a flood. and the idea of a flood is connected to doctrine or persecution. Are we together? So there was the idea that there are, at this way mark, you are going to see maximum flood. Flood is doctrines. So you're going to see a wave of many doctrines here. There's also another idea that this is a repeat of the 12 of 60. Purple supremacy, purple regains power. So we might see flood, persecution. Are we together? I think those are the thoughts that actually most had when this was being presented. But now, when Elder Terry comes and starts understanding what these two other words mean, then she has another interesting discovery. So Elder Tess never focused more on this, but this. But the name is the same. It's one name.
So with the suggested new marker for the Sunday law, does it mean that the sort of voting is sort of is taking precedence, and then the laws are like a minor issue, or is it that the laws are still there, and now we're recognizing something which is part of the story?
Okay, I would go with your second thought. Like the laws are actually there, but it's not the main focus now. The main focus for marking this event is voting. Are we together? But it doesn't negate the fact that the laws are there. They are part of the story, but I think now the main story has shifted from laws to voting. I don't know that is what you mean.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
But that, I guess, must be according to the Tess's study, because it's her study which makes voting the focus. I haven't looked at all the other studies. I don't know if they all also make voting the focus or not. But as far as I understand, I don't know if the movement is now saying that we should all focus on voting and laws is not the focus.
Okay, I don't think that's what they actually mean by saying that we are focusing on voting and these others are not focused, because if they are part of the story, it means we also need to focus on them. Are we together? What I want us to see is that when we come to the marking of this event here, we have always narrowed our understanding that the only issue that can mark this event is a what? It's a law. Are we together? But now we are realizing it's not just a law. We can have a Sunday law and not mark a law, because this is a thought we carried from the Millerite history. And one thing we are realizing is that when you come to 2014, the Sunday law for the priests, I agree we had some laws. We had the Heroes Act. We had another law. I don't know whether Hobby Lobby would mark a law, although it's a judgment ruling. But we didn't just mark laws. We had issues like Gamergate. We had events, actually, that marked a Sunday law. So the narrowing of our mindset to think that Sunday law must be a law because it's called a Sunday law is what we are now saying. We are changing the marker. And the current one, which is prominent one, is the issue of voting. Are you getting my point now?
Yes, but that is Elder Terry's.
Yes, and I'm saying that is Elder Terry's. We know Elena has a study based on Islam. And I'm saying based on the many dates, because Elena has a different perspective of coming to that. And I'm saying based on the dates that are here and based on what people are thinking, the issue is, if we are going with voting, what is the voting? So based on Elder Terry's what happened? Sorry. Oh, nimeshika. Sawa. Okay. Sorry for that. So based on Elder Terry's presentation, of those who are digesting it are actually saying we would agree with voting, but we don't have July as the maximum voting. We have other thoughts. Are we together? And that is the thought I'm trying to carry along. Like, I know there are, I think Curtis is not even dealing with the issue of voting. Curtis is dealing with the wars between the king of the north and the king of the south, right? But I tend to think, my perspective, like as much as we would have studies of Islam, studies of the king of the north and the south, the idea is when you come to, there is a study that had been done, I think, don't know the date, but it was called separating layers. And I think it's after 2019, separating layers. And what was being shared was, we came to the WEMAC 2019, and the problem was, what event marked 2019? November 9. Are we together? And the problem was, we did not come by then to a harmony of the events that we were marking here. A good one was the Battle of Raffia, because we came to a realization, the Battle of Raffia, we actually needed to understand it the entire year 2019. Are we together? So, and victory for the King of the South was gained even before we came to November, because Trump had already surrendered spheres of influence to Russia even before November 9. Are we together? So, and the thought that was in the people's mind was, it's the war between the King of the North and the South that was actually marking this way mark. But what we needed to understand is the study of separating layers. We have many subjects that we run through our reform line. We have the stories of Islam, the King of the North and the King of the South. We have the studies of counterfeit. And what we do to these stories, we are going to thread stories on our waymarks. So, and what we needed to understand is, as you thread stories on these waymarks, you need to be able to separate layers. So, and the issue was, what marked this event was a story dealing with what? The internal politics of what? Of USA. So you cannot come to the war of the King of the North and the South and suggest this is the way mark for that. You need to separate stories. And I think it's the same thing when we come to our history. When we mark a Sunday law and what Daniel 11:41 marks, it marks the conquering of the glorious land. America, it's dealing more with what is happening inside America. So, and the study of the King of the North and the South, it's another layer of story that actually complements the history of USA, because we need to run two threads of histories. And when you run multiple threads of stories, they might not actually fulfill on the same date. They might actually fulfill on the same year, like 2019, many events, but the dates are different. So, and that's what we need to do to separate all that. So there are many people who are giving contributions that actually cement the idea that 2024 is a Sunday law, or 2025, and they're approaching it from different perspectives. But we also need to come to a realization, my perspective, that when we mark a Sunday law here, it's dealing with America. So you might bring a study about the King of the South, an example, and overlay it here to complement that this is actually a Sunday law, because all these studies complement one another. The study of Islam, the study of the counterfeit, all this, they actually are adding up and complementing our reform line. So if we can be able to separate layers and see that the way mark of 2019 as an example was being marked by the study of revolutions. So you need to understand the study of revolutions right from when Elder Tess gave them. They actually come progressive, showing 2019 we used to mark this as Trump rising. We mark 2021, and the study was taking us into the internal politics of what is happening in America, taking us to the way mark Sunday law, where actually from here we would mark, we have the rise of Trump in a different perspective from what we have had here. So it's the two steps. First, you need to conquer your own land, and then you go and conquer the world. So I think other studies are still there. Elena is having a different perspective, which is also a contribution to this. And I think what we need to come to a realization is, when you ask like Elena herself, the study itself dealing with this has its own prediction, which is a different date, because she was marking a terrorist attack on the Sunday law history. I think when she first presented, I think 2024, that's when I first saw the presentation. So multiple studies, but they all complement one another. But we need to separate actually the layers. We need to understand when someone addresses a different subject. So based on what I think Elder Terry is trying to show, it's based on the same thought of the internal politics of America. That's what she's marking, dealing with the internal affairs of USA, that actually fulfills these events. Another person has a different study from a different subject that is actually saying, I also see this study leading me to a Sunday law. So in this study that I'm doing, I'm trying to check on the perspective of what Elder Terry is trying to give. And I'm saying we need to listen to other teachers who are, most of them are yet to become popular with their message, based on the schedule that has been given, for us to see their perspective and their line of story. So, I'll give you time. How many minutes? 35. Okay.
So there's a lot of mistakes, and I will try to so like if you look at our past, and the new history, India has not been say one singular factor that makes the enough. So it has been what is going on. So the Sunday globe history is defined by so many things that you can learn on top of that and see that this is what has happened. Yeah. So coming to our time and the consistency of what is it the dispensation that has kind of defined how the family law will look like, and therefore now what it becomes another additional restriction of family law or yeah, because I mean it wasn't if the voting itself was not really impacted by other sectors, but you see it as a factor now. Yeah.
Okay, I would agree with you on idea. The dispensation itself, it's determining, like, we had a discussion with a friend, and we were trying to say that it's a discussion. Don't take it so deeply. Like, when you look at the way our movement is going, and this is a challenge that we actually have, we are coming to a realization that we have carried a lot of baggage from these past histories. And I think some of this baggage, there are models that actually led us to carry the baggage here. And we are now coming to this history and we are realizing we have a challenge to harmonize the baggage that we have always carried with what is actually happening. Some of the models that we have had, I'll give a good example. The issue of public evangelism. Where did we get that baggage from? This history, we actually see baggage models that show that there is public evangelism here that should happen. And then we come here and we realize this model, though proven from the lines that it actually exists, it's complex to implement it here. Are you seeing that? So there are a lot of baggages that we have carried here, and they are giving us problems here. Because this dispensation, I would say in a loose end, it's peculiar in nature. Like, not everything that took place in the Millerite history, we are going to actually see repeat in our history. A good example is that we are seeing now, this is limiting us to laws. We are now coming here and realizing you focus more on the laws, and they're actually not big laws that you would expect. Are you seeing that? This perspective tells us, go to the world, set up evangelistic missions. We are coming here, we are realizing even the dynamics is different. We are in a new age, information age. Different dynamics in this dispensation. So I think this dispensation itself, it's defining some things and telling us you need to unlearn some of the things you carried in your past histories. That's the perspective I would give. So just to continue, back to our story. So I'm saying we are coming to the idea that it's the idea of voting. And with that, it's going to now give us two perspectives. And I'm going to give the first perspective. So, and the first perspective that we are having is that if you mark July, then something happens in July that leads to a maximum flood. So the first perspective is something happens in July that leads to a maximum flood. Eh? And ovalisho kiatu pale. Kimia ovalisho pale. Something happens in July that leads to a maximum flood. So, and this is what this actually means. If this is July, and we are saying July is the marker, and the issue, the marker here, two perspectives, number 5. So, if you agree with the issue of voting, you cannot negate the fact that we have a number 5. So, July is the marker. So, we know that we mark a number 5. Then, this is July, but it leads to a, let me just put it this way. So when you look at this term, Quintus, Fabius, maximum, sorry, yeah. So you're going to see, we can be able to separate this name like this. This one is linking us to number 5. This one is linking us to voting. And then we have this maximum flood. So it's a 3-step. 1, 2, 3. And with that in mind, then I'm saying, if the first perspective is that something happens in July, this is the marker, the number 5. But July will lead us to a what? To a maximum flood. So, and you're going to see that if you mark the maximum flood as the actual event, which is the Sunday law, then you're going to see this argument shows that July is not the what? It's not the Sunday law, but this event, which we would mark in a question mark, is the Sunday law. So, and this is the perspective that I'm giving here, the progressive perspective, that we mark July as the beginning of something, but it is not actually that thing. Are we together? It gives the progressive perspective. So there are people who are saying, at least we would agree with what Elder Terry is giving, marking July 18th. Are we together? But July 18th is the beginning of something that climaxes to this event. So if it's the beginning, then this is the climax. This new date must be the Sunday law. Are we together? And then you have Elder Terry herself who is saying, no, so this is progressive. And you're going to see Elder Terry is saying, which is the second perspective, that July is actually the maximum flood. So everything happens at a point. And this is a point. So it's either a point or a period. So if everything happens at the same point, then this is one singular event. This one is a series of what? Of events. Let me explain. So the marker is this. And Elder Terry in her presentation is saying the entire name fits in which way mark? July. So it's one singular event. July is the issue we have number 5. July is the issue we have a voting. And the voting she's speaking about is what happens in what? The Republican National Convention, when they uplift Trump as their candidate. And these other people were saying, we don't think that the Republican nomination is actually the maximum flood. We actually think there is even another issue, another election that has more bigger dynamics of voting, which is not actually July, but which event? November. So they are saying, we don't disagree with you marking July, but we think it's the beginning of something. Are we together? So July is the beginning because of the number 5, but when is the climax? That's where the second person is saying, I think November is this event, the maximum flood. that's a perspective of a different person. Are we together? While Elder Terry is saying, I don't think it's progressive in nature. I know Sunday law is a period, but based on the study, July is just the event that has all this symbology in it. It is number 5, it is a voting, and then it must be the maximum flood. The issue dealing with voting. And I said here, you need to understand the maximum flood in the context of voting. So, yet the other people saying, I think July marks the beginning of something, but not actually the Sunday law. I hope people are getting the perspective now. So that's why I'm saying, is the Sunday law a point, as Elder Terry is trying to show, or is it a period, a beginning of something? And some are going as far as even January, saying, we actually would not even mark November 5th. Why? Because even Trump has not taken office. When will Trump take office? On January. So that would mark actually the day when we would mark the maximum flood. And some are associating the flood with laws now. The set of executive laws is going to sign. So this is what we are actually having now. Based on Elder Terry's presentation, is it a point, or is it a point or a period? Is everything happening in July, or is July the beginning of something? So, is it one event, or is it a sequence of events? And we need to understand, just a minute, if it's a singular event, then everything happens in July, and which is the maximum vote. Or if it's a series of events, something began on July, you'd mark it this way. July, maybe November, as someone is suggesting. This is number 5. November would be voting. And there is another perspective saying, if it's a sequence of events, then it gives the nature of progression. And you are going to see, if you mark this as one event, voting as the second event, then what would you do with maximum flood? You'd also mark it as the third event to be consistent with your progression. And this is also leading to a dilemma, because people, those who are saying it's July the beginning, November is the voting, then the problem is, what date will we mark the maximum flood? And we have people who have thoughts, and we have people who have thoughts that maybe the maximum flood, which is actually the marker for the Sunday law, might be in the future, not actually July or November. So he was fast, and then you.
Sure. So, what does the maximum flood mean or look like?
Okay.
I get Quintus is 5, July, okay. Regardless means voting. What does maximum voting mean? Since that's what we're saying that, or at least this line of thought is saying the flood is the voting. So what does that mean that it's a maximum vote?
So I think to understand the maximum flood, people are suggesting that to be consistent, we cannot take this symbology and use other portions of the Bible to influence us to understand what maximum flood is, as Elder Tess did in the previous study. But focusing on this, to understand what the maximum flood is, Elder Tess went to verses that address flood as what? Persecution or a doctrine. Are we together? But now we are saying, based on this study, stick to the same line of thinking. So the maximum flood must be understood in the context of the word itself. And so it is something that has to do with what? Voting. And I think basically, in a simplistic way to understand what voting is, I would say this is the maximum voting. It's when people make a what? A decision. Are we together? It's all about making a decision. So the idea is the Republicans making the decision, marking the Sunday law, or is the entire nation of America making the decision, the entire Sunday law? And I think Elder Terry is trying to defend that and saying, the king of the north, in the studies Joy tried to do, not tried, but Joy did, the king of the north took over with a small people. So she's trying to say, it doesn't matter about numbers, it's the idea of what is actually happening. That idea of making a decision, the king of the north first victories were won by a small people. And that's why he's marking that Trump's rise to power does not need to be approved by a majority, but a people, even if it's a small people. That's what she's trying to say. But the idea is making a decision. Maximum flood is where the decision is made. Is this maximum decision made in the context of the Republicans voting for Trump and uplifting the image of the beast, as Elder Terry is showing, or is it the November 5th election, which is the maximum vote, which you would say based on the numbers, or is it something in future? Are you getting that now?
Yeah. So then, what is with the small group? What is it which makes it a maximum decision, or what is it that makes it a maximum?
No, that's the dilemma. Because people are saying it's a small. Comparing the Republican elections with the general election, which is bigger, which looks maximum. It's the general election. But now, people are not able to come out of that box. Because where did we corner ourselves? Because of this number 5. If you go to this, then you need to agree with the number 5. Because you cannot negate this structure. Like, all the symbologies are there. So people are leaning towards this because it looks like the maximum. But how do you deal with number 5? What actually happened in July? And now this is the idea that something happened, but it's not actually the Sunday law. It is November that will mark voting as the maximum. But now then the methodology requires you to be consistent. Then actually November will not be the Sunday law, but actually the Sunday law must be something else, because progression means every symbol has a different date. You cannot now take this alone and then combine this. That's the dilemma that we have. So we'll see Mwangi, then Joy. Yes? Yes? It's maximum? Okay, yeah. Is the electoral, so you think it's the maximum flood? Okay, that's another perspective now. Yes. Okay. Okay, on the first we'll take it there for Q&A. So I'll take Joy and then Seko and then Jeff, and then I continue.
So I'm having a problem when we say understand maximus, that is maximum flood in context. Because now we are saying in the context of
voting.
Because what stops us from saying to understand also happiness in the context of the previous one? Because what I understand we are doing with this name Quintus Fabius Maximus Gagis is understanding every one individually and knowing what it means, and then bringing everything together to try and understand, okay, what is this telling us? Instead of seeing what the first two words mean, and then using what they mean to understand what the last part of the name means. Because I think when we do that, we become biased.
Okay.
Because now we are saying maximum flood is maximum voting, but there's nothing in the word Maximus Gagis
that addresses voting.
So I think we should understand maximum flood individually, and I don't know why we are dismissing how it was understood before by the text
Okay.
flood, because we know that flood was connected with the Sunday law because of Revelation 12.
Yeah.
Because I think aside from August and Sunday law, the Maximus Gagis is the second witness that connects voting in July to the Sunday law.
Okay, so I think I agree with you, and I'm saying I don't think we are when good girl. So I think just to respond to Joy, I hope you understand what Joy is asking. So Joy is saying Why are we being biased, like to associate flooding with voting, rather than understanding it independently and then asking ourselves what this flood is, and she's saying we should not even discard Elder Tess' thoughts of flood, connecting it to Revelation 12. And I'm saying, I think I agree with you, and I don't think we are actually negating. I don't think I've seen anyone negate and say Elder Tess' thoughts were wrong. But I think what Elder Terry is doing is coming up with a different perspective. It's same symbology, but she wants to understand it in her own perspective. If you go back to Elder Tess and what Elder Tess associated maximum flood with, I think that makes a lot of sense to me, and it's actually correct in according to how I understand. But what they are saying is, as you put it clear, let's understand everything independently. So maximum flood, and then we are saying what could be this maximum flood, and people are suggesting that, or Elder is suggesting that, or Lela Pamide is suggesting that to actually stick to the story, we need to we can also limit ourselves to what this entire symbology is trying to teach us. The event or the issue at hand is there something to do with voting. So, and they are saying, if we take the perspective and understand it in the context, then the maximum flood would be associated with what? Voting. But if you go back to Elder Terry's perspective, which also associates with the flood, with persecution, with the doctrine, I also think it has merit in it. Only that now Elder Terry's perspective is telling us, we know we agree with this and we agree with this. But when you bring the issue of July and voting, then we can also, let me say, bias to think that this in the application would also influence us to think about the idea of voting. Who was it? Oh, it's your next round now. It was this, then Jeff, then I continue because of time. Actually, this was a mind blower, but it's okay.
I think I had two questions, one of which that you explained that you want to ask, but then the second is when we come to the market or to July, then November, the issue that you have the maximum flood. Why would we have a situation where you have July and they say fix with voting, right? You go to November, you fix with voting, and you also expect the maximum flood to be with voting. Does it point us then to a given specific period of how this event should happen? And even to that, we have July as a new agitation, for lack of a better term, of a Sunday law that is coming on the maximum flood.
So you're now actually asking what is happening here, because you're asking, is July marking a period? Sindo? And that's why I asked the question, is it a period or a point? Because the very same questions you're asking is the very same questions everyone lacks answers to. Because if you look at the perspectives of what I'm trying to explain, it's either you mark the voting, it's either you mark the voting to be the RNC, which is July, or you mark it to be the general election, which is November 5, or let me just say future. When you look at progression, it gives us another vacuum here. Or do you mark everything at one singular event? And the moment you do that, it's not that it is easier to mark. Because as Carl is having a problem, if you go to what maximum is actually July the maximum, or is actually November 5 the maximum. Do you see the problem? So marking it as a point has loose ends. Marking it at a period has loose ends. Actually, we are not actually harmonizing our thoughts on even the two perspectives. We can't pick this, we can't pick this. But we all acknowledge we have something developing, but no one has actually a better way to explain everything. Are you getting my point? Not that I also have answers. I was just trying to give the perspective of what is happening internally. And we all have questions. Mwangi is asking, give me a second testimony. Because the law says under 2 or 3, something is. So we need to have a second testimony for either the progression or the what. Because the moment you buy one perspective, you have more questions to answer. Can you really see that? The only that we have not had other presenters give, they have not had that latitude to give everything in details as Elder Terry has actually tried. I think they will have, but there are people who actually like one. I think it's Tyler Sin who has actually said. Actually, when I also come here, I can go to sources that show Fabius didn't actually go here, but where? Here. So people are putting to scrutiny everything, and I think this is in a way helpful for us, because when everything is challenged, that's when we have that better refinement. Are we together? All I want us to see is what is actually happening. All these loose ends that we have actually currently. And we need to think about that as a movement. How do we come to a consensus on these issues? What is actually this waymark? The only thing we can all agree is that we're in that period, the Sunday law history. What is we see externally, the external events that we see are actually shedding more light to what we see. But we need to understand there are two messengers. And I think this is the next line of thinking I had. But I'm coming to that, Jeff, and then I continue. So if people have questions, how many minutes? 10. So I'll know Jeff very fast. And then I have the next class. If you want, this was not part of the class, but you can continue the thought. All Q&A.
Okay, so my question was, you said that our understanding of the Sunday law was shifted from voting. So it's probably a similar question, but I think it's a bit different. And the question means, okay, is how we understand this, the how we understand voting, is it the beginning of the Sunday law history, or is it like the Sunday law test? And the reason is, if we say, okay, like Sunday law test, the Sunday law test counts is associated with the mark of the beast and the seal of God. So whether it's July or November or whichever date, that will force us to say that the action of voting, the people who voted in the right way received the seal of God, and the people who voted the wrong way received the mark of the beast. So now the question is whether the act of voting marks like the beginning of a Sunday law period, or it is the actual like test, the Sunday law test.
Okay, same question, same dilemma. So Jeff is asking, is it the beginning, progression, or is it the date? And I'm saying I don't have an answer. It's the same question you're asking in a different way. And I'm saying, I look at the dynamics. If we would mark voting, maybe we would try to think those who make the right decision are actually going to pass the test, mark of God, maybe. Those who make the wrong decision, mark of the beast. I do not have a problem with that. The first dilemma is, can we actually agree whether July is the actual day or it's the beginning of something? And that is the dilemma we have. Are you getting that, Jeff? If we then agree which event, is it July, is it November, is it the other day, then you can now try to understand how does the mark look like. Yeah? How do people pass and people fail? The problem is that we can have all those, I agree. But now the problem is, based on these two perspectives, is July the actual Sunday law, where everything happens at a point, one singular event, where you would associate all these symbols on that day? Is it the beginning of something? Or is it actually even a different date? There is nothing like July. Maybe we would use another study like Islam from Elena and say, based on the study of Islam, Sunday law is maybe November 2025, an example. Or should we use a different study, the King of the North and the South, and suggest this is the study that marks the way mark Sunday law? But I try to give the idea, when you look at the event of the Sunday law and what the thoughts, the study of Daniel 11:41 tries to show, I would limit myself in a way to think of what is happening inside America, not just. We would actually, I would actually limit myself to events happening in America. America is the center focus of our message, I would say, for now. So the other studies which are contributing and adding more weight to our history, our experience. But even on the one we would want to focus more on, sorry, I even forgot you. Oh, I gave you a chance. No, I have stopped Festus and Maureen. So I have 10 minutes. I hope you understand my worry too, Jeff. So, and the thoughts I also want us to share is there are also people who have this thought that maybe July is the beginning, this perspective, I would mark it here. Some are saying July is the beginning, and then you would mark November 5th as something. So they are saying this is the marker, and we have this as the progressive, but this is not a verified version. People are still thinking. Others are saying maybe July is the beginning, November is the Concord. What event we might associate with the Concord? Unison, Sindio. So maybe generally people are going to have a unison and say this is what we want. People are still thinking about that. There are many perspectives that you would actually associate with this. So, and I'm saying this because if you actually see every perspective, there's some sense in it, but more of loose ends. Can you really see that? But we need actually to think loud and see what perspective looks more sensible for us. Another line of thinking that I want us to see is that when you come to the 1888 history, you are going to see, if you have watched actually the presentation Lapamina tried to show, I think the study is Behold, Meet Thy God, or what, something like that. You're going to realize that he's trying to suggest that we are mimicking the 1888 history. Is it double M? Is that the correct spelling? And some of the characteristics that we are going to see in the 1888 history, there are a lot of good and bad. So the first one, you're going to see the 1888 history had some events. The first one, you'd mark mistrust. The second one, we had a partisan spirit. Another event, we had a lack of a unified message in this history. And a lot of distress. These are some of the characteristics that were in that history. And you come to this history, and how many messengers do we have? We have Jones and who? We have Jones and Waggoner. Is it the correct spelling? Or is it a single N? I think it's single N. What message was A.T. Jones giving? I'm going to suggest that A.T. Jones was dealing on the current events. And A.J. Waggoner is the one who was actually dealing with what? The message of righteousness by faith. And you're going to see this was dealing with the external events. This is the external history. And this was dealing with the what? Internal history. And when you look at these two messengers, so this is actually dealing with the events. This is the work of preparation. Righteousness by faith. So, and when you look at this history, you are going to see that John's message, this is the message that should have been the great test. Because this is what would have enabled everyone to overcome sin. Are we together? Dealing with the events is not the test, but how you overcome sin and the issue is what was the great test. And you're going to see that when you look at that history, I think Elder Paminda has tried to draw parallels and show there have been two messengers, and himself, and he has tried to show that for so long currently, what is the message that he has always tried to teach? So you're going to see that he's tried to deal with the message of righteousness by faith. He has tried to show the issue of the sinful nature and what? And the sinless nature, which you would actually see it in a different dynamics. This is the fast brain and the slow brain. All this one is the higher powers and the lower powers. It's the same dynamic. This is the study would just summarize the nature of humanity. While you also have a messenger more dealing with the external events, which are events. And you're going to see as these are the thoughts. I don't know how many of us have realized that there is a new line of thinking when you come to angels. How many have witnessed that? Yes? What has been said? You can just explain the thought. Okay, I agree. I will surely. Okay, I agree. I hope most of us are familiar with that. Not that I also don't have problems, but mine was a mind blower, right? And I want to bring these issues to us so that we might give our thoughts, we might contribute and speak our minds. Are we together? I think that's how we develop and grow. And the reason why I'm saying this is what Linda is saying. That dynamic also does not actually challenge Linda alone, but I would think most of us have questions, right? And I think the idea is, based on this, that who gives the message of the hour? What is the message of what is the great test? The message of righteousness. So this becomes the message of righteousness. That's the idea that Elder Terry is trying to show. And now the big problem is, how do you harmonize this with the message of equality? And the thought is, though there was this structure here, we had the Sabbath. So we also have equality. But how you are able to keep the Sabbath is by understanding this message. So the way how you are able to understand and keep equality, it's by understanding the study of the nature of humanity. There are such parallels that are actually being drawn. What we need to do is put everything to scrutiny and see, does it actually make sense in reality and logically? I think we will have, my time is up, we will have maybe the discussion in our next class. So I want to stop there. I think we can just pray, and then maybe the next class we can pick the debate there. So let us pray. Thank you, Lord, for your care and protection. Thank you for this wonderful moment as we try to reason together, as we try to correctly divide your word. I ask that you may give us wisdom, you may enable us to think and come up with a better understanding of this message. Help us, guide our minds and our thoughts. Uh, Open up truth to us that you may always be on the right side. I pray this, believing and trusting in Jesus' name. Amen.